Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, and welcome to this second webinar of the series of the Ocean Decade Vision 2030 webinars. This is session 2 on science and solutions for sustainable and resilient ocean economy that will deal with challenges 3, 4, and 6. So sustainable ocean economy, sustainable blue food, and resilient community. As you know, these webinars are meant to gather inputs and feedbacks on the series of white papers that were launched at the end of January. The review process will end at the end of February, and this is to gather as much as possible input in the white papers and their contents up to the conference of Barcelona. I'm Nicola Bassan. I'm science officer here at IOC UNESCO. And I'll briefly introduce the webinar, and then I'll pass the word to all the panelists. The speakers for today are Eric Olsen, Peter Hogan, and Srinivasa Kumar. And please note that the webinar is being recorded. To go through the program of today, we'll have this brief welcome and overview with an overview of the meeting objectives and the agenda. A very quick presentation of the Ocean Decade objectives, outcomes, and ecosystem, the introduction to the framework of the Vision 2030 process, and to the Ocean Decade conference in Barcelona and its program. We'll then move to the core of this webinar, which will be the 3 challenges that will be discussed today, and the overview of the white papers and the review process. Then the last part will be for a Q&A and discussion. But in the meantime, please feel free to provide your inputs and comments to the white papers in the Q&A box so that the co-chairs that are with us today can start answering some of those questions. And then we'll have some closing remarks at the end. Without further ado, I'll leave the floor to Alison for the overview of the decade and the framework of the Vision 2030 process. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Nicolo. I'm not sure if my camera is working. I certainly can't see myself, but maybe it's working for you. In any case, hopefully you can hear me okay. But it's great to see you all here today. We've got another really large audience, which is wonderful. As Nicolo said, this is the second of a series of 4 interactive webinars, as we're calling them, which are really an essential part of the review process for the Vision 2030 process as it moves forward, where we have open as well, and we can certainly put the links in the chat, a request for written comments to the Vision 2030 process. But because the aim of this whole process is to have something that is very participatory, that has a very broad stakeholder buy-in, we thought it would be useful also to have these webinars so that people who may not have necessarily the time to be able to write written comments could also provide their feedback and comments to the Vision 2030 process. So thank you for being here, and thank you for being part of this very important process for the Ocean Decade. So the objectives of the workshop are fairly simple. I think we've sort of already touched on them. It's really to talk a little bit, and I'll do this very briefly because I know what we really want to hear from the co-chairs about the key messages that are coming out of the process, but we will introduce a little bit the Vision 2030 process and where we're up to in the current evolution of the process. We'll then hand over to our wonderful co-chairs who are here today from 3 of our working groups to hear about some of the key messages that are coming out of the current version of the white papers. And then over to you for really what is part of the key part of this webinar to get your feedback and input to the white papers, and so you can react on what you are hearing from the co-chairs. So if we can move to the next slide, please. This slide is sort of many of you will have seen this before in different presentations and documents and so on, but this is really the slide that sort of tries to sum up, I guess, a bit the theory of change for the Ocean Decade, moving from the ocean we have to the ocean we want. As you're probably aware, we have a very large and growing rapidly portfolio ecosystem of decade actions, with around 50 programs, nearly 300 projects, different activities and contributions. And all of these decade actions are working in a collective way around the 10 Ocean Decade Challenges. And these challenges were identified in 2020, 2021, when the implementation plan for the decade was being put together. And they really tried at that time to represent the most immediate and pressing needs for ocean science and ocean knowledge. Now, these challenges were always intended to be dynamic, to evolve over the life of the decade. And this Vision 2030 process is really the first time we are attempting to do that, where we're really trying to take stock of where we're up to with the challenges, see where we're going in terms of setting a strategic ambition for the different challenges, and also seeing if refinements or changes to some of the challenges are needed as part of that reflection. The idea of the decade being that these actions working together around these challenges, which are really the entry points for action in the decade, will lead to the 7-decade outcomes or contribute significantly to the 7-decade outcomes. And these outcomes, which you can see on this slide as well, are really the desired characteristics of the ocean by 2030. Now, we already have a really good and solid system in place, a monitoring and evaluation framework to measure progress of the actions themselves. We have a process in place via the State of the Ocean Report, which is an IOC more strategic product to track progress against the outcomes of the decade. But we don't yet have the piece in place to really see how the decade is tracking and working and creating impact around the challenges. And that is a big part of what the Vision 2030 process is doing. And that's why it is so focused at this level of the Ocean Decade challenges. So maybe if we can move to the next slide. And so this one, oh, sorry, my camera is coming in and out. This slide sort of tries to set out what we mean, what is at the heart of the Vision 2030 process, and what is at the heart of the process is trying to set a strategic ambition for each of these Ocean Decade challenges so that we can have a clear and common vision of what success would look like for the Ocean Decade Challenge at the end of the decade, but that we can also understand the milestones, the targets, and the indicators that we need to achieve throughout the decade to really be on the path for success. And that is going to help us not only tell the story of the decade, but also be more targeted in our future calls for decade actions, so that we're really filling gaps, meeting priorities, and also more targeted in some of the resource mobilization work that we're doing and some of the partnerships that we're creating. So it's really trying to find where the decade can add the most value across the Ocean Decade challenges. And the reason we're doing this now, as I said, the challenges were always designed to be dynamic and evolve over the life of the decade. The decade started out as a very organic and bottom-up, movement that through the decade actions has created a huge groundswell of activity. And there is a really unique opportunity, particularly as we lead up to the Ocean Decade Conference in Barcelona in a couple of months, to channel a lot of this energy and channel a lot of this momentum and define some of these, more systemic and more structured ambitions for the Ocean Decade challenges for the coming years of the decade, and thus sort of be able to deliberately design the science we need and avoid any dispersion of decade actions in the coming years. So if we can move on to the next slide. So the process has been going on for about a year now under the leadership of our very, very valued co-chairs of 10 expert working groups. So there are 10 working groups, one for each of the challenges, obviously. Those co-chairs play an essential role because they're not only leading their own working group, but they're also working together with other co-chairs to make sure that we're finding the synergies and the linkages across the 10 Ocean Decade challenges, so that we're not looking at the strategic ambition of each of the challenges in isolation, but that we're also looking at the linkages and the relationships that exist across the challenges. These working groups that have been established have about 15 members each, so we've got about 150 experts who are working on or have been working on these series, or the first draft of these series of white papers. And they're working both as individuals, but also because they have networks and connections and are also talking within those networks and connections to already get buy-in to the process that is going on. So the products that you're already seeing and that are part of the review process that we're talking about in the webinar today have already had some broader participation and input from different networks. So if we can move on to the next slide, please, just to sort of give you an idea of where we're up to in the process now. As I mentioned, under the leadership of the co-chairs, the working groups have been working very hard to develop the zero draft of 10 white papers. Again, one for every Ocean Decade Challenge, obviously. These are the zero drafts that were released for public review at the end of January, and that are open for review until the 22nd of February through these webinars and through the survey, the written survey as well. The aim is then that the co-chairs and the working groups will work with the Decade Coordination Unit here at IOC UNESCO to develop a version 1.0 of those white papers, as well as a synthesis report that will really try and capture some of the key outcomes and messages across the white papers. And that version 1.0 of the white papers, plus the synthesis report, will be brought to the 2024 Ocean Decade Conference in Barcelona, which is happening almost exactly 2 months from now. The white papers will be at the heart of that conference. The conference is really structured around trying to get feedback, to get further input, to incite debate and dialogue on the white papers, so that by the end of the Barcelona conference, you'll see the dates there from the 10th to 12th of April, there will be a second version, a version 2.0 of the white papers that will be prepared for publication. But of course, the process doesn't stop there, because the white papers all of them have recommendations, have different priority actions that are identified. And the aim is that by April, June, we have a series of white papers with a series of recommendations that we can then collectively, as a community, through the different mechanisms of the decade and different partnerships outside the decade, really start to implement, so that by the time we get to some of the big global ocean convenings that are coming up, and notably the 2025 UN Ocean Conference that will be held in France in June 2025, we've already started to see action and impact and realization of some of the key priorities coming out of the Vision 2030 process. So if we can move to the next slide, and this slide is just to give you a little bit more information and a bit more of an overview of the 2024 Ocean Decade Conference, which, as I mentioned, is really structured around, has most of its scientific sessions structured around the outcomes of the Vision 2030 process in the form of the white papers. But the conference is a key milestone for the decade. It is part of a series of international conferences that happen every 3 years. The first one was the kickoff conference in 2021, which of course, because of COVID, was an online event. So this conference that will be held in Barcelona in a couple of months is the first in-person gathering of the Ocean Decade community. It's coming at the beginning of the 4th year of implementation, and it's really a moment to celebrate achievements, but to take stock and to really define this collective vision for where we're going in the future years of the decade. And that's obviously where the Vision 2030 process and the white papers come in. Registration for the conference has just closed. It actually closed on Saturday. We're expecting 1,500 participants at the conference. We have requests for a lot more people to attend than that, so we're still going through the process of confirming registrations and so forth. But in addition to the main conference, there'll be a wide range of parallel and satellite events around the conference. If we get time and if there are questions, certainly in the Q&A, we can talk a little bit more about the conference as well. But just to give you one last slide before we hand over to the working group co-chairs, and this just gives you a bit of an idea of the program of the conference, so that you can see how the results of the Vision 2030 process, how the white papers are, as I've been saying, really at the heart of this conference. So this is the conference, the high-level conference program for the 3 days, and you can see we have 4 sessions there, starting on the afternoon of the 10th of April through to the morning of the 12th of April, where we will be presenting the white papers through a series of keynotes, panels, and then actually going into parallel sessions where smaller groups will be able to really have an interaction around some of the key findings of the white papers, and get feedback from the participants at the conference, but also those participants that are online, to be able to really get a further feedback and further input that can be fed into the next version of the white papers coming out of the Barcelona conference. So again, that we walk away from Barcelona with a clear collective vision for some of the priorities of the Ocean Decade moving forward on the basis of the white papers. So that's where we're up to. Well, that's where we're going, I should say, in a couple of months. Where we're up to now is really looking at these 0 drafts of the white papers so that we can have the most robust set of white papers possible to take to Barcelona. So we count on your input, we count on your feedback. The co-chairs are going to lead us through some presentations now where they will present to you the key outcomes of each of the white papers, and then we'll go into, as Nicola said, go into some discussion either verbally or through the chat to start collecting your feedback so that it can be taken into account as we go through this review process. So again, thank you very much for being here, and I'll hand back over to Nicola, who will introduce the co-chairs to go through the outcomes of the white papers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alison. And yes, connecting to this last point of collecting inputs to the white papers, we are going to be asking also at the end of the white paper of the presentation, sorry, all these questions, but please keep them in mind while looking at the presentations of the co-chairs, and also if you already downloaded and read thoughtfully the white papers, please feel free to provide your inputs in the Q&A. So I'll briefly leave this on the screen for you to have a look to these questions, but mostly these questions are focusing on the strategic ambition, if it's clear and comprehensive, if there are any data, knowledge, or information requirements that have been addressed fully. If there's any partnership funding, expertise, and technology identified appropriately, and so on and so forth. But without further ado, I would like to move to the working groups. So we'll start with working group 3, focusing on challenge 3, on sustainably feed the global population. Which objective is to generate knowledge, support innovation, and develop solutions to optimize the role of the ocean in sustainably feeding the world's population under changing environmental, social, and climate conditions. The 2 co-chairs of this working group are Vera Agostini, Deputy Director of FAO Fisheries and Aquaculture Policy and Resources Division, and Eric Olsen, Head of Research Group for Sustainable Development at the Institute of Marine Research in Norway. I know Eric is connected today, so without further ado, Eric, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nicolo, for the introduction. I hope everybody can hear me fine. So I will delve right into this. Our working group consists of 16 members, including the co-chairs. You can see all of them on the left. We're also happily supported by a consultant at FAO who helps us with a lot of the admin and pulling things together, input into more in understandable format. We started our work in July after, we have submitted the white paper in the beginning of January. And also participated in the webinars so far, and we are now looking forward to hearing back from both the webinar today and from the external review process on the work on the draft white paper we have prepared. But we are also working in parallel to incorporate suggestions that we're getting along the way, both from internally at our institutions, but also from other activities that are happening. We presented our white paper at the Indian Ocean Regional Decade Conference 2 weeks ago and got a lot of valuable input there that is being processed and being included as we speak. So in the presentation today, I'm going to give you some, I'm going to focus on what we have presented in the white paper, but also draw your attention to some of the changes that we are doing to the white paper as we move through this revision process. Next slide, please. So the overall way we've been working is that we are using the common knowledge of our experts that span different fields from economics to fisheries biology and aquaculture. We have, in some cases, split the work into different subgroups, focusing on different activities. We've done a, I wouldn't say systematic review of the literature, but we've looked at some recent and key literature within the field. We have reviewed the UN Ocean Decade actions that are relevant to Strategic Ambition 3, to how to sustainably feed the world's global population. And we are also in deliberations, discussions with co-chairs of all the other working groups. And of course, we're getting input from public webinars, and we're looking forward to the review process. Next slide, please. So when we're talking about how to sustainably feed the global population, what we're talking about is what should our aquatic food systems look like in the future? And it's important then to take into account that if we are to succeed on this challenge, we need to have a holistic approach where we actually deal with the food systems, from how the food is produced, either as fisheries or as aquaculture, and how it's then processed, transported, and brought to markets to end up at consumers and ultimately to end up as dishes that you eat. And it's not until it becomes food that people actually eat that you are actually able to impact people's health. So unless you have this holistic food systems approach to aquatic foods, you will not really reach the goal of feeding or nourishing, which we think is a better word, the global population. So next slide, please. So the paper as it stands now, you can see the table of content on the left, is focused around two overarching challenges that the working group has identified. And that is how to produce more aquatic foods in a sustainable manner. And the second one is, even though if we produce them, it's not, unless we are able to distribute the aquatic foods to ensure equitable access to them, then we won't be able to address the challenge properly. So the two overarching challenges are these of the challenge of production and the challenge of distribution/access. And to analyze this, we have looked at who are the users and their needs. And they are, of course, very wide range and interdisciplinary, since aquatic foods spans everything from the consumers, from the producers at either end, and then everybody in the middle who does the transporting, the packaging, the refinement of the products. And this means that the science we need to address these challenges is very broad, it's very integrated. It covers everything from food systems, production, nutrition, health, environment. It needs to be integrated with socioeconomics. And there are strong linkages to other challenges, perhaps strongest with the sustainable blue economy. And it requires an improved cooperation with private sector and private enterprise, because it's the private sector that actually produces the food. It's the private sector that brings it to the market and sells it as fish and chips in restaurants, or as pieces of fish or frozen shrimp in our shops. And we also need to keep in mind that aquatic foods have tremendous importance for small-scale fishers and aquaculturists around the world. And they contribute tremendously to local livelihoods, to the health and well-being of local communities around the world, especially in lower-income nations, Pacific Island states, and other such regions. Next slide, please. So in terms of the barriers, these grand challenges, we have been looking at how to produce more aquatic foods and how to improve the equitable access and distribution of them. And for each of these, in the white paper, we have grouped them into subcategories related to resource management, value chain, policy, and governance for each of these two grand challenges. Based on the input we have gotten so far, and also from our discussions in working group meetings after submitting the paper, we have thought of restructuring it slightly. So next slide, please. And this is the new structure you see here, where the grand challenges remain the same. But what we are seeing when we delve into more detail and listen to the feedback is that some of the sub-challenges, the more specific issues relating to achieving them, are specific, as you can see in the two upper boxes. But there are also some cross-cutting issues that need to be resolved, especially in terms of governance, and also in terms of new frontiers, new food products, how to sustainably produce food in a more sustainable manner, or how you increase circularity and synergies in the food systems and also with terrestrial food systems. And of course, technological information is tremendously important here. Next slide, please. In terms of users and user needs, as I mentioned initially, there is a vast forest of user and user needs within this challenge, from producers, value chain stakeholders, consumers, managers, NGOs, certification authorities, etc., etc. And you can see them on the right. And when we look at them with a broad kind of mile up high vision, what we're seeing is across the users is that there is a need for understanding the value of the aquatic foods and the value and the needs of the processes of small-scale fishers and aquaculturalists and how that is linked to the value of food. It's a need to understand the barriers to securing sustainable aquatic foods. And there is a need for users to develop and find solutions, both new and implement available ones, for the sustainable and equitable use and production of aquatic foods. However, this requires trade-offs, increasing aquatic food production while minimizing habitat impact and minimizing CO2 emissions is a difficult trade-off. There is no easy way out where you can maximize all three. And it illustrates that to achieve a goal to feed or nourish the global population, we need to strike reasonable trade-offs that balances these needs. And we need to do that while ensuring that the nutritional health value are high and the environmental impacts are low. So next slide, please. So when we've then looked at what are the specific science needs that we need to deal with to address the challenges, we have looked at what are the science that's going on within the decade, what's happening outside or beyond the decade. And we, in the white paper draft, we devised it into three categories: resource management, value chains, policy and governance, and cross-cutting issues. And we looked at how to co-create partnerships, resource knowledge sharing, accessibility, etc. And we have this ongoing discussion about what is happening. So we have refined this a little bit as well. So next slide, please. So what we're doing now is trying to align this more with the barriers we have, the production, increasing production and increasing equitable access. And this will be updated in accordance with the comments we have received so far and the ones we are expecting to receive from the webinar and the review process. And will be markedly changed or updated prior to Barcelona. So next slide, please. We also look at setting the science needs in a higher level setting, where we are looking at science needs that can support understanding of current and future states of the system, that can support implementing and evaluate existing interventions that will support us breaching the barriers, that will support the design of new interventions, that will support the monitoring of enforcement, that will support us to develop new tools to disseminate information about aquatic food systems, and that will support the development of new frontiers, be they technical or governance ones. Next slide, please. And finally, we are developing milestones and indicators. The draft version does not contain any milestones and indicators, but we are in the process of developing milestones and indicators according to these 10 categories that we have here. These are common categories across that are used in many of the white papers, from number 1, enhanced ocean data accessibility and availability, to enhanced utilization of ocean science and knowledge. And we very much look forward to getting inputs from today and in the review process on how to design these so that the version of the white paper we present at Barcelona will be more complete than the one we presented so far. And the reason why we haven't come this far is, of course, as has been mentioned, that the process of the decade visioning process has been very, very fast-tracked. We started in July. We had to prepare the white paper by January, and working on a topic that is as broad as aquatic food systems is difficult within that time frame. So hence, some things we weren't able to reach within the deadline when we had to submit the draft version, and one of them was the milestones and indicators that will come in full and comprehensively in the next version. So with that, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Eric, for presenting the Challenge 3 overarching challenges, but also the main elements that you identified in the strategic ambition, the strong connection with other challenges such as Challenge 4, and also for underlining the fact that these white papers are currently living documents. So any input and feedback from the broader community is more than welcome. And this will be an ongoing revision up to Barcelona, as also Alison was mentioning. And of course, also for mentioning the time frame difficulties. This is an experiment, and so all the feedback from the audience is more than welcome. But we'll move to the next working group now. So working group 4, focusing on Challenge 4, develop a sustainable and equitable ocean economy. And the scope is to generate knowledge, support innovation, and develop solutions for equitable and sustainable development of the ocean economy under changing environmental, social, and climate conditions. The two co-chairs of the working group are Peter Hogan, Policy Director of the Institute of Marine Research in Norway, and Andrew Rhodes, Head of IALUMBRA from Mexico. I know Peter is with us today, so please, Peter, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nicolo, and thank you also to Eric for explaining some of the process behind this and how we get to this. In fact, also for mentioning the Indian Ocean Regional Conference hosted by, I believe, the speaker of the next paper, Srinivas, which was quite useful for us as well to have some early feedback on the draft paper that we will discuss more today. So this is then about a sustainable and equitable ocean economy, which is the title. And you see here that we are, I think, even a couple more members of the working group than the previous one, up to 20. And they are from all around the world, different places, different institutions, different almost walks of life. It has been complicated to work together across all the time zones, but we have at least come to very quickly, in fact, come to an agreement on what is the kind of the approach we'd like to have. It's a common misunderstanding, I think, for people who look at this from the outside, that when we have a challenge on ocean economy, it will be very much driven by, you know, the contents of the various ocean economy sectors and how to develop a business. Well, that is, of course, part of it, but the ocean economy is really describing everything that the humans are doing in the ocean. And it's quite crucial that this becomes a holistic approach, that it becomes something that deals with the environment, with the human activities, with social and economic aspects in combination with the environmental aspects. So if I can have the next slide, please. What are the kinds of approaches and wording that we like to use here? It's a commitment to a sustainable and equitable future for the ocean, harmonizing economic growth and development alongside environmental preservation and societal well-being. This can be expressed in different ways, but this is one way we put forward as our way. And so what do we need in order to have a sustainable and equitable ocean economy, we propose informed and inclusive decision-making, innovation that actually looks at minimizing negative environmental impacts of ocean activity, human activities in the ocean, which are likely to increase and which may need to increase, perhaps should increase, but then we need to do it in the right way. We need to capitalize on technology for that. Equity in many different dimensions, not only wealth, but also distribution of information and technology. And we talk about stakeholders in the ocean economy, but we also talk about rights holders, which is not exactly the same. Next slide, please. So why is this important and relevant? Well, I think many of you know the rationale for this with how many people live close to the coast and so on, and how it's crucially linked to human needs, even for the people who don't live close to the coast. But also these various aspects of identity, indigenous knowledge plays a key role in our white paper because it's all about well-being of individuals and communities. So the food sector is one of these sectors. There are linkages with the former white paper, and I'll get back to the linkages to the other white papers later. Whereas maritime shipping and related port activities and so on is a big sector. In fact, small-scale fisheries and aquaculture, which was mentioned, is one of the largest ones in terms of people involved. The tourism, coastal and ocean-based tourism, is actually the biggest one in many dimensions, and that is sometimes not neglected, but not getting so much attention from science. We tend to think of science in some of the sectors that look into future ocean energy, future technology, and so on. But having a tourism sector which is sustainable is actually quite important, and it's a very important sector for many countries, just like fisheries and food production. So the ocean is a valuable contributor to the global economy, of course. And next slide, please. So what are the gaps and barriers? We clearly see, and that comes in from all the input we are receiving from various stakeholders and informants and people in the working group, climate change crops up. It's really a threat to sustainable development. I think we see that in other challenges as well. But it makes it difficult to also plan economic activities and human activities. And then we have institutional inefficiencies. There is often difficult to coordinate. There's difficult to address complex ocean issues, and capacity, of course, is limited. So we need to be aware of that. We need to look at how we can address it. And then the knowledge systems, the linkages between scientific knowledge and policy implementation, public-private partnerships, local indigenous knowledge, make this work to produce informed decision-making is a key barrier that we need to overcome. And then we have this nice title, which is actually a title of a subchapter of the paper. Just finance is just about finance. It's all about finance. It's the economy, of course. But finance frameworks that are directing money into the right sustainable ocean activities is requiring innovative mechanisms, but quite important to take the ocean economy in the right direction. So we really highlight that. So the next slide, please. And indeed, a lot of challenges. Since we look at the ocean economy as actually human activities in a broad sense and human well-being, we can list a number of sort of two-way linkages between this particular challenge and all the other ones. I'm not going to read it out, but there is some obvious ones like challenge 3, which is represents a sector of the ocean economy. But ecosystems and biodiversity preservation is key and a core thing to achieve sustainable production from the ocean, that we have effective protection, and that this is done in a common way. We need a clean ocean to produce food from the ocean and to attract tourists actually to the ocean and have well-being. I already mentioned climate. Next slide, please. So hazards, we'll hear about that. We cannot have a sustainable ocean economy unless we have a way to deal with avoiding damages. And then all of the say more maybe in some way technical challenges to deliver for support of the overarching one is of course very important. And I already mentioned capacity development and emphasizing equitable and sustainable practices is of course linked to humanity's relationship with the ocean. So next slide, please. All right, in terms of the vision or the where we want to go, we have 6 here that are key ones. And we put that out for your comments in the review, that this holistic perspective can be achieved if we have the ocean managed in an equitable manner, human rights, equitable access to benefits. The second, accessible and equitable for current and future generations. So we need partnerships for that, fair distribution of ocean resources and opportunities in the different nations. 3, underpinned by sustainable practices across industry. So this illustrates that this is not just challenging, not only about science, it's about very tight links with the private sector. Number 4, it needs to be resilient to changing conditions. I mentioned climate change, but also technology and new opportunities that arise. And supported by good governance linked to knowledge and action, strengthening the links between science and actual policy development is crucial. And then it's supported by accessible and comprehensive knowledge. Yes, I think that was it. Next. And so we mention some other important components here. Partnerships, capacity development. I already mentioned integration and synergies with other Ocean Decade challenges, but also SDG 14, transformations on the ocean panel, which are out there in the literature, conventional biological diversity and others, which we also point out in the paper. So next, please. So what are the milestones? We point to, and for each of those we have in the paper, I don't have time to go through it, we have also proposed a series of indicators. So enhanced ocean data accessibility and availability becomes again a rather technical one, but quite crucial. Advancement in ocean knowledge sharing, building capacity, sustainable policy and governance implementation, stakeholder engagement, increased funding, and transitioning the private sector and improve equity within the ocean economy. Yes, please, next. So that was all I had. I think I invite you to look at more details in the paper. It's probably too long, but I really hope that we will get a lot of good feedback. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Peter, for showing us and presenting the importance of Challenge 4 and the ocean economy in general, together with the main sectors, the role of indigenous knowledge and local communities also in shaping the vision for Challenge 4, but also the main gaps and barriers in achieving a sustainable blue economy and an equitable blue economy, and the main components that you identified together with the working group for the strategic ambition for Challenge 4. But let's move to working group 6, focusing on Challenge 6, increase community resilience to ocean hazards. The scope is to enhance multi-hazard early warning services for all geophysical, ecological, biological, weather, climate, and then anthropogenic related ocean and coastal hazards, and mainstream community preparedness and resilience. The two co-chairs of the working group are Nadia Pinardi, Professor of Oceanography at the University of Bologna, and Srinivasa Kumar, Director of the Indian National Center for Ocean Information Services. I know, Srinivasa, it's today with us. So please, Srini, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nicolo, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all the participants. So I'll try to make this presentation on behalf of also my co-chair, as introduced by Nicolo, Nadia Pinardi, and several other members, experts on this working group, whom the names you will see in a moment. As Nicolo mentioned, the Challenge 6 deals with increasing coastal resilience to ocean hazards. But those of you who would have seen the white paper, we actually emphasize a holistic approach to coastal resilience, considering hazards from both ocean and coastal perspectives. So on this slide, you're actually seeing the members of this working group. We have had a wonderful group of experts representing different areas of expertise, spanning different coastal hazards, starting from geological, geophysical, biological, hydrological, meteorological, and so on. We've had experts spanning geographies. We had ECOPs, and then a nice gender balance in the group. So of course we've had a really good time communicating and then bringing up this draft white paper to where it is currently. Next slide, please, Nicola. Eric and Peter earlier streamlined the process. What got us here in developing these white papers. Thanks for that. So I'll not get into the detail of it, but just to mention that we have started working on the initial parts of the white paper in June. And then, like other working groups, we've actually done a desk study of the existing literature. And then we had discussions with supporting groups of experts. And then we tried to initially come up with a strategic ambition. And then looked at the user requirements and the drivers and so on. And then as the process got along, we've had actually several input gathering sessions from within the members. And then, of course, the DCU public webinars. And by January, we've actually completed the draft as it is today. And then we have been running it through a process of public consultations as we are doing today. And then, like as Peter mentioned before, the Indian Ocean Conference that we've hosted just a couple of weeks back in Hyderabad, which was structured exactly the same way as the Barcelona conference is structured, with different sessions addressing the concepts of the different white papers and seeking feedbacks. That provided a good opportunity for us to get some inputs from a large section of the audience who attended. So hopefully we are not currently working on incorporating several of those inputs. And of course, we'll be happy to receive inputs from these webinars. And then, I'm sure we'll have a much better version of the white paper than we have as it is now. Next slide, please, Nicola. So the strategic ambition itself, if you see, we're targeting for two outcomes when we talk about enhancing coastal resilience. That is, the first one, importantly, is to design people-centered multi-hazard early warning systems as a means to enhance coastal resilience. And then we have defined certain characteristics of these multi-hazard early warning systems that there should be a lot of stakeholder engagement. All stakeholders involved in the end-to-end early warning system should be part of the development of such a system. There should be responsibility in sharing of responsibilities, and then accessible communication, early warning systems, networks. You'll see some of those listed as we go through my presentation, and then institutional capacity building. And the second outcome, importantly, is actually to design adaptation planning strategies to increase coastal resilience. Now, how do we do that? By using the new data from the ocean decade to prepare updated plans and solutions. So that's how actually we intend we propose that, we design adaptation and planning strategies. Next slide, please, Nicola. So we started looking at what are the hazards. We want to define that first as a first step to enhance coastal resilience. And then, as Nicola mentioned before, all these categories of hazards, starting from geological, geophysical to biological, to ocean, weather, hydrology, climate, anthropogenic hazards, ecological. Now, these are the different categories we considered. And then we tried to put in the, each of those hazards that we need to address to enhance coastal resilience. I'll not read through those lists there, but these are the major categories that we addressed. Next slide, please. And then we started looking at who are our users actually, since we need to, do an analysis of the user needs. So there are, when we talk about coastal resilience, early warning systems, and adaptation strategies, now these are the kinds of general categories of users. You have upstream stakeholders whom we need to consider, who actually collect observational data and produce analysis and forecasts for multi-hazard early warning systems. This could include research agencies, operational centers, businesses, indigenous and local communities, NGOs, national disaster mitigation organizations, and so on. Then you have these international intermediate stakeholders who are users of the knowledge that is being generated by the upstream stakeholders and customized products for specific needs. Again, this could include several of those stakeholders listed there. And then finally, the downstream stakeholders who are the users of information for risk reduction and governance. Now, those could be government agencies, public authorities, and civil protection agencies, and so on. So this has been identified and listed in the white paper. Next slide, please. Now we try to then understand what are the components that we need to address when we talk about coastal resilience. Most important things being risk assessment, which includes multi-hazard evaluation frameworks, having the capability to do exposure and vulnerability analysis, and then come up with multi-level and multi-sectoral risk analysis. So those are the three components that we identified and then addressed in this white paper. Then we come to risk reduction, which is the next step, which includes a series of steps that we identify, starting right from monitoring, forecasting, and early warning systems, that is the multi-hazard early warning systems as a means for risk reduction. Then warning, dissemination, and communication systems, preparedness and response, which is also very important. That is the community preparedness and response. Then we talk about sectoral, medium to long-term planning strategies, which could be zoning and infrastructure planning. Then we talk about nature-based solutions, and of course, digital twins as means of risk reduction. Then we also talk about institutional, governance, and social mechanisms. So which is, again, we need to have governance frameworks, we need to have disaster recovery planning, equitable coastal resilience, and of course, this is something Peter also spoke about before, financing, insurance, and government investments. Then capacity building across all these three components of coastal resilience is again very important. And then we also talk about corporate social responsibility. Next slide, please, Nicola. So here, this is just to give you a glimpse of, some of those important components that I mentioned in the previous slide. I'll not get into the detail, but then, like, for example, you talk about risk assessment. How do we address multi-hazard evaluation frameworks? So these are the different steps that are required. These are the user requirements, starting right from observational evidence of a hazard happening, both from in situ and satellite data sets. Then we need merged topography and bathymetry data sets to conduct modeling, then forecasts and projections, predictions, then toolboxes to represent, the interactions between hazards and the, built-down environments, and then visualization tools, cloud computing, and so on. Next slide, please. Now, again, we also looked at what are the different components to build monitoring, forecasting, and warning systems. I will not read through all of these things, but some of the key things, for example, we need optimal global networks of observing systems that could be in situ and remote sensing to detect a hazard. We need actually to develop and maintain this infrastructure in a long term. We need to share data sets in a fair manner and collect data, use of AI, ML, and so on and so forth. So we have identified these things and then they have been discussed broadly in the white paper. Next slide, please, Nicole. So we also identified some of the priority data sets for each of these multi-hazard early warning systems. Like, for example, we need, we identify the vital role of observations, data sharing, and adaptation planning. Next slide, please. We also looked at some of the issues touched upon knowledge generation and sharing. So we need to build risk in a very systematic manner. We need to actually have initiatives for enhanced risk knowledge and communication. This is where we talk about capacity building, some of the structures that are available currently, which could be utilized for spreading risk knowledge amongst different stakeholders. Next slide, Nico. We also try to identify some of the technology and innovation solutions, like I spoke about before, using digital twins, AI, ML, deep learning, fair principles of data sharing, then climate resilient infrastructure. Then we talk about effective communication with ICT. We talk about, like, for example, CAP kind of, methods where we can, disseminate information in a much effective and efficient manner. Next slide, please. So to summarize a bit, so the key outcomes: designing, implementing multi-hazard early warning system, adaptation planning strategies. We have also identified certain challenges. We need to adapt a multi-hazard framework, which is dealing with complex technologies. And then we also identify that ocean hazards have cascading effects, which are not yet fully understood. Then as a recommendation, we say that we need to utilize a risk framework instead of solely relying on a hazard-based approach. And then we need to focus on technologies that remove barriers to rapid innovation uptake. And then expected impacts, we actually need to reconceptualize this challenge 6 within the framework of risk and establish an evaluation matrix, how to measure indicators. This is something which we are still working on. Your inputs would be very useful in building those indicators. We have started thinking about what are those indicators, and then some things have been touched upon in the white paper, but that's something we will work on. Next slide, please. And next slide, please. So these are the questions which Alison presented before. Next slide. On the white paper, where we expect your feedback. And then, so we also, like I mentioned before, we need to define these key indicators of resilience, which are specific to each typology. For example, built environments, estuaries, backwaters. There are different typologies of coastal environments for which we need to define key indicators. And we need to align these indicators with relevant SDGs. There are no specific indicators in the SDGs that address coastal resilience, but then several SDGs address this. But this is something we need to think about how to integrate. And then we need to establish regular consultation process to gather feedback. Next slide, please. So what we also recommended is actually to come up with a coastal resilience requirements review process, where we actually have a process to gather, the requirements of the users. We have periodic consultations. We conduct relevant impact studies, undertake critical review, and then preparation of high-level guidance, and then implementation of this process through intergovernmental frameworks, such as through IOC, UNESCO, and so on. Next slide, please. So this is my last slide. So where I mentioned about this conference, we've received some nice feedback. We'll be, for example, we have received guidance on how to, that we need to add more information on the different stakeholder organizations or processes that are involved, which needs to be added into the white paper. There's linkages. And then for example, one important thing is to integrate traditional knowledge in prediction and forecasting. We touched upon the point, but then this needs further explanation in the white paper. Financing is something that we have not really, addressed in a deep manner. That's something which we will actually talk about. And then, of course, on the indicators. Those were some of the inputs we received, and then we are summarizing the outcomes and then recommendations from the IOCON 24 conference in the next 1 week or so before the consultation process, the public review process ends later in February. We'll be actually consolidating some of these inputs for all the white papers from the IOCON and sharing it with the other chairs and also with the DCU. They hope that they'll be useful in improving all the white papers. So that's all from my end. Thank you very much, Nicole.
Thank you very much, Srini, for presenting and bringing us through the process and the evolution of the white paper and the work that you've done within the working group, but also the different categories you identified regarding ocean hazards, the components that need to be addressed for what concerns coastal resilience, the need of having a multi-hazard evaluation framework, and the main needs that there are in terms of monitoring, forecasting, and early warning systems, besides, of course, the recommendations and the outputs, some of the outputs of the Indian Ocean Regional Ocean Decade Conference of 2024. But we'll move now. Sorry, these were the contacts of Nadia and Srini, the co-chairs of Working Group 6. And we'll move now to the Q&A and discussion part of the webinar. This is the time where the audience can type the questions, inputs they would like to answer. Well, they would like answers on, or they would like to comment some of the following questions mostly, but also any inputs you deem relevant. In the meantime, we received also some inputs and questions in the Q&A. So we'll eventually start raising the comments that were sent in the Q&A, and then we'll collect all the feedback and inputs during this half an hour session. I can see there's one of the first comments, which could be for both Eric and Peter. Food production coming from the marine environment needs space. There has been little work done to assess what will be the spatial needs to satisfy a given level of demand for food. A parallel could be drawn with what happens with spatial needs calculations for marine renewable energies, where a lot of work has been carried out to calculate the needs. This, of course, is related to marine spatial planning to other area-based management tools, and how those have been included within the work, and how important they are within your two white papers. So maybe first Eric and then Peter.
Yes, and thank you for that question, Johan. I fully agree that the spatial consideration is tremendously important, and if we're going to produce more, and it's actually one of the topics that we are touching more upon in the revision of the white paper. It's touched a bit upon in the current version as well, in terms of the governance that needs to be in place for us to succeed in achieving the challenge. Of course, governance itself, putting management in place, is politics. That is, as we have seen it, not the main focus of the decade visioning process. The question is, what kind of science should we put in place, should we develop to support spatial management, sustainable ocean plans, marine spatial planning, if you call it by different names, that will support this. And that is definitely one of the science needs moving forward, that is in common with many other of the challenges, and also has been touched upon in the white paper by the sustainable blue economy. So I agree with that, and I'd ask if Peter want to add to this.
Yes, thank you. Also from me, thank you for the question, and I think Eric answered quite well, and maybe expanding a little bit on it. definitely space use is crucial to the future of the ocean economy, and allocating space to different sectors of the economy and to activities in those sectors which are actually sustainable is going to be crucial for sustainable ocean economy. That space allocation is not only given based on making sure that the various interests get their area to work on, but it's actually considered as part of a contribution to sustainability. So I think we don't have a lot of room to sort of expand a lot on issues like marine spatial planning or sustainable ocean planning in the white paper itself, but I think it's been assumed by all of us that it's a key part of the process of developing a sustainable ocean economy. Maybe to expand a little bit, I think we talk about science needs for two things: science needs for policy development, and then science need for management, or implementing a given policy. So I think a crucial, perhaps, addition we like to highlight now is that this science support to policy is then science support to a sustainable ocean policy and equitable ocean policy. And how can we do that in a way which where the science is not sort of taking the main seat and deciding on the policy, but providing the evidence that is needed for good and well-informed policy decisions. I hope we can manage to express that in the white paper, and I thank you for the question, which really is an important topic to keep in mind. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eric and Peter. We can move maybe to a question for Srini on Challenge 6. How are we tracking collaboration, for instance, with UNICEF and their programs regarding climate resilience and adaptation with children? If it's in the framework and objective, but is implementation represented and strengthened in the paper with other UN-wide or international-wide initiatives?
Yeah, thank you, Tanya, for that question. Actually, this is also something which we received feedback in the IOCON conference, that we need to actually, look at, wider groups of stakeholders than they are listed currently in the white paper. Like, for example, you mentioned about programs of the UNICEF, and then we also received information on certain programs of UNDRR, for example, WMO, which are actually dealing with the coastal resilience and multi-hazard early warning systems. I think this is something, thank you for this feedback, and then we will certainly look at some of these initiatives on the, from the UNICEF perspective, and then how they can be linked. At the moment, what we have actually looked at very closely is the programs, for example, 6 programs, 24 projects, and 6 contributions that have been submitted, against the call for action for the UN Ocean Decade, which fall under this, broad category of, addressing the Challenge 6 coastal resilience. But thank you for this feedback. We will certainly look at some of these broader programs or projects that could contribute. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Srini, for this. There's also another point made for challenge for white paper 6, is if the paper considers how communities are engaged in building resilience, addressing multi-hazards, and also the role that indigenous knowledge could have in addressing Challenge 6.
Yeah, so again, we have mentioned again the size of the white paper, which is about 10 pages. I think this is a challenge all the working groups had to kind of face. So trying to put in the maximum amount of information within that limited space. But then we try to touch upon some of those things, like, for example, the community, involvement of communities in community preparedness and response. In fact, in an annexure that we have actually put to the white paper, we talk about community recognition programs, such as, like, for example, say the tsunami ready, the weather ready kind of programs, which can be used as a framework for building multi-hazard, resilience. And we also touched on the, if you also heard in my presentation in one of the slides, I mentioned about traditional knowledge, indigenous knowledge, and incorporating this, the need to incorporate this into the formal technical warning systems that we all talk about today. So we need to actually really find ways to get that in. So we mentioned that, but we will try to, see where if we can emphasize these points a bit further. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Srini. I think also other points were answered in the chat. To answer a couple of general questions, what is the coverage of the work right now for the white papers? It's, of course, the Ocean Decade, and it's at the global scale right now. And the scope is also to identify in these months and in these review process some regional specificities that that can help also the decade identify specific regional gaps and needs. Then ocean literacy education is necessary for sustainable economic development and resilient societies. Yes, and this is a common theme coming from different challenges. And this will be particularly discussed in our last session of this webinar series, which will be this Thursday at 3 p.m. Central European time, which will deal specifically with Challenge 9, so capacity development and skills, and Challenge 10, so mostly ocean literacy. And but this is again a common topic and a need which is coming up from all the challenges. So how to have in place a correct ocean literacy and education that can help us solve some of the challenges we are dealing with in the ocean space. There's also a comment from a small scale fishermen association. The main challenge is keeping the cold chain and food safety measures. So to what Eric was talking about in terms of equitably distributing and all the logistical process after the catch itself. And another challenge is the competition with I presume aquaculture, tilapia, and species which are cheaper in terms of national market. So maybe also the challenge of having market differences in this. Maybe Eric, you want to comment this?
Sorry, which question is this related to?
This is it's a comment coming one of the last comments of the challenge of small scale fishers in keeping the cold chain and food safety measures throughout the entire.
Yes. Sorry, that is definitely, that is one of the key challenges with improving aquatic food systems is having this whole chain from producers to markets that work effectively. And in many areas, actually getting the transportation chain to work so that you don't have deterioration of the quality of the food or actually loss and waste of the food is tremendously important. And this needs new technological solutions. It's a very prime example of an area where science and technology needs can be identified and we need to be developed to solve the solution. And it can have huge ramifications in for instance in Africa and Asia and other parts where we're getting food away from the coast into other densely populated areas is a challenge. But where the potential is quite large, because you can have large fish stocks, large fisheries, but getting it to where people live is the main challenge.
Thank you very much, Eric. There are a couple of questions also regarding yes, the event, but I see Srini, you're typing already. So regarding the Hyderabad event that that was mentioned, and I think more or less some of the main comments and points have been addressed in the chat directly. Again, in Challenge 6, maritime spatial planning could be a key tool in increasing community resilience to ocean hazards. And how well is the spatial planning harnessed in the white paper? Also, I presume also concerning integrated coastal zone management and planning of the land-sea transect for what concerns coastal resilience. So this was touched in the white paper and was actually mentioned in the white paper as a planning tool that could be used to increase community resilience to ocean hazards. Yes, I think we touched most of the comments. I don't know if our panelists have any last points and comments to make, and then we can move to the wrap up and then next steps. Okay. Well, first of all, I would like to thank very much the panelists, so our co-chairs, and all the audience for participating. As you know, this is the second set of webinar sessions that we're having. The next one will be tomorrow at from 7 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. Central European time, and it will be focusing on challenges 6, 7, and 8. But for now, I will pass the floor again to Alison for the key takeaways and the wrap up of this webinar.
Great, thanks, Niccolo, and a huge thank you to all the co-chairs for the presentations, which judging on the richness of the comments and the feedback were very well received, and I think a really, well, hopefully very useful feedback for the co-chairs. I know certainly for us here at the Decade Coordination Unit, it's been extremely interesting having heard these comments from the second webinar, because I think, again, we're starting to see some common themes coming out even from what we heard yesterday, and that's really going to help us pull together some of the key messages and some of the synthesis. So certainly some common themes around Indigenous and local knowledge, and really how we're using the framework of the Ocean Decade to ensure that the complementarity of Indigenous and local knowledge is really tied into ocean science. Lots of comments today and also yesterday, I'm sure we'll see this moving forward as well, about the needs of local communities as end users of ocean science and ocean knowledge. Often, I think in the decade when we've been thinking about user groups, we've been thinking at a higher level. So how are we bringing that down to local community needs? Other common themes that I see emerging are around the translation of these priorities to the regional and to the national level. And actually in the webinar yesterday that focused on marine pollution, ecosystems and climate change, there was a lot of talk about national strategies and policies and databases and so on. And as Niccolo alluded to, a key next step in this process, once we come through Barcelona and come out with a version 2.0 of the white papers, is going to be taking some of these global priorities and trying to translate those to the regional level. And we have a number of regional task forces in place, a number of regional decade collaborative centers, such as the one that Srinivas is running with the colleagues at INCOIS, that are going to help us do that work. And of course, the conference in India a little while ago was a prelude to that process, and I'm looking forward to hearing a detailed debrief of that, because I think that's really going to help us think about how we are translating some of these global priorities to the regional level. At a thematic level, I think we're also starting to see some of these key themes that really do cross over many of the challenges. And just, I mean, these are just some examples, but for example, blue carbon, I noticed that came up today. Of course, as it relates to resilience, as it relates to a sustainable ocean economy, came up a lot yesterday, as it relates to climate adaptation and to ecosystems. And so these are some of the issues that we're going to be needing to address between the co-chairs and across the working groups when we meet in New Orleans in a couple of weeks' time, and then trying to pull out some of these key issues in the synthesis report, so that we're ensuring that this process of looking at the strategic ambition challenge by challenge, as I said at the outset, is not creating new silos, but that we're really being very, very conscious to be identifying those linkages. So very interesting food for thought. We're halfway through the webinar series now, and of course still seeing the written comments that are coming in. So I'm sure that some of these reflections will continue to grow. So I really encourage you, if you're interested, to join the next webinars tomorrow and on Thursday. And then other key dates to remember, of course, are the 22nd of February, which is the date that the written comments will close via the SurveyMonkey link. If any of you are in New Orleans for the Ocean Sciences meeting, the AGU Ocean Sciences meeting, we have quite a short session, a town hall session on the 23rd of February during the lunch break. And keep an eye on social media, because we'll be putting details of this out. But we'll be having some of our co-chairs there in person to present some of this work again. Again, it's going to be a short session, but it'll be a chance for a bit of an in-person presentation. And then, of course, for those of you who are able to be at the Barcelona conference in person, looking forward to seeing you there, having you engage in the parallel sessions and continue these discussions. The plenary sessions of Barcelona will also be live streamed, and we'll be looking for ways to make sure through Slido or other tools that we can also be collecting comments from a virtual audience, because we know that not everybody is able to travel to Barcelona. So many more opportunities to get involved in the lead up to Barcelona and then after Barcelona as well. So thank you for your engagement. Keep continuing to be engaged, because as we said at the outset, the whole idea of the Vision 2030 process is that it's a very participatory and collective vision of the way forward. So I'll end with that, and with again a huge thank you to the co-chairs, both for their presentations today, but also their tenacity, their patience with us, and their very, very hard work over the last few months. We count on you to keep going for the next few months, but we know we're in very good hands with the co-chairs. So thank you all very much, and thank you to the audience, and a huge thank you to Niccolo and Ord, of course, who have been behind the scenes, in front of the scenes, but really coordinating and leading this process for the Decade Coordination Unit. So thank you very much to the team as well. And I wish you all a good rest of your afternoon or evening or day, and hopefully see you in some of the other webinars that are coming up this week. Thank you very much.